I think in the interest of time, we will begin. My name is John Morris, and thank you for coming to this annual State of the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. Just a few announcements. Next week, we resume our regular night Tuesday noon seminar. It will be in the East Pavilion, as always, and we will have case studies presented by residents who have done their elective time with us in our ADRC. And then 2 weeks from today, we're back here in Farrell, but out in the atrium. We're having our pre-Alzheimer Association International Conference poster display, so that will be from 11:30 to noon, because we also will have lunch at the same time, pizza. All right, well, again, thanks everyone for coming. Here are my disclosures. I'll talk about our major research support from the National Institute on Aging, but also great support from the Alzheimer Association and from foundations. You see my consulting relationships and the trials in which we have been participating. So this is the Knight ADRC as of 4 years ago, 2010. At least as many of you who could be here, and it's a great group. I enjoy presenting this photograph at presentations that I give across the country, across the world, because there are so many talented faculty and so many dedicated staff. And of course, we're all supported by a wonderful group of committed participants. I'm going to indicate here, this is Mr. Norman Seay, who is the emeritus chair of our African American Advisory Board. Mr. Seay is seated right here. And I wanted just to underscore something I mentioned to many of us on Saturday, that this is the 250th anniversary of the founding of St. Louis. And in honor of that, the History Museum, the Jefferson History Museum in Forest Park, is commemorating 50 greatest objects, 50 greatest moments, 50 greatest images, 50 greatest places, and 50 greatest people in St. Louis. And Mr. Seay is one of those 50 greatest people for his really seminal work in civil rights in the 50s and 60s and continuing today. So we're very fortunate that we've had this association with Mr. Seay. Congratulations. Now, in 4 years' time, several people in this photograph have departed. Monique Williams, Consuelo Wilkins, Yvette Shalene, several staff, Judy, Christy, Stacy, others. But I want to underscore that a wonderful thing about the Knight Alzheimer's Disease Research Center is we do also have great stability. And these 15 individuals have all been present in the ADRC for 20 years or more. So this really gives us a bedrock on which we can continue to incorporate new individuals into the program. And here are some of the new investigators and visiting scholars and staff that have come our way and joined us over the past year or so. So it's really, as I say, great to be continually renewed, but still have people who have been with us for many years. Well, I want to just take this opportunity to tell you what I think we should be doing to remain consistent across the Alzheimer's Center in terms of how we use different terms. So I think for simplicity's sake, we ought to say Alzheimer disease and Alzheimer Disease Research Center. We don't need the apostrophe S after Alzheimer's. The term Alzheimer's disease to us should represent the brain disorder, the pathologic process in the brain, regardless of clinical status. So then we have two major stages: the preclinical stage, the brain disorder prior to clinical expression. We operationalize that as CDR0, clinical dementia rating 0. And then the other major stage, symptomatic Alzheimer's disease, the clinically expressed stage of of Alzheimer's disease, which is clinical dementia rating greater than 0. I prefer the term symptomatic Alzheimer's disease because it encompasses both mild cognitive impairment and AD dementia and eliminates the debate, which is unanswerable, about when MCI becomes dementia. So I think we should discard the term dementia of the Alzheimer type and talk about symptomatic Alzheimer's disease. And I prefer that we use the term cognitively normal rather than non-demented. You know, technically the definition of MCI is someone has cognitive impairment but lacks functional impairment, so therefore doesn't merit a diagnosis of dementia. So if we use the term non-demented, then we're talking about cognitively normal people plus MCI. So I think we just ought to use the term cognitively normal to be clear about what we're trying to communicate. In a recent grant submission that I'll discuss in a little bit for the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, we're mandated by the National Institute on Aging to rename some of our traditional cores. I don't think we need to belabor this, but now the Education Corps has the cumbersome title Outreach, Recruitment, and Education Corps, or ORIC, and the Biostatistics Corps is the Data Management and Statistical Corps. I think in everyday purposes we can still say Ed Corps and Biostat Corps. We've been fortunate to have 2 satellites for over 20 years, but now the new mechanism won't allow satellites, so we elevated our 2 satellites into cores. We had the African American Outreach Satellite, and now it's called the African American Outreach Corps. Colloquially, we call it the Memory and Aging Project Satellite, but its official name now is African American Outreach Corps. And we had a rural satellite, which now is the Rural Outreach Corps. So what about the Knight ADRC? So I think from the time my mentor, Leonard Berg, the founding director of the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, began the Dementia and Aging program here at Washington University, we've been noted for our incorporation of perspectives and input from investigators from many different fields, transdisciplinary. I think we've also been noted for the effect, the impact of our research findings regarding the origins, the pathologic course, the diagnosis, the treatment, and now moving into the era of secondary prevention of Alzheimer's disease. I think we've made an impact in all of those areas. I list a few of what I think are key contributions to the field that have been adopted across the Alzheimer field: the clinical dementia rating that I've mentioned, to stage the severity of dementia and determine its presence or absence, and its derivative, the screening test, the Ascertained Dementia 8 or the AD8. While we certainly weren't alone, my colleague Joel Price, now retired, and I and many others in the ADRC championed the concept in the 1990s of this preclinical stage of Alzheimer's. A number of methodologies have been initiated and perfected here, including the technique to measure the production and clearance of central nervous system proteins in humans, developed by Randy Bateman when he was a postdoctoral fellow with Dave Holtzman, and then measuring central nervous system proteins in the interstitial fluid of awake behaving animals. John Cerrito also working with Dave Holtzman. In the ADRC was developed an antibody to amyloid beta called M266 that subsequently Dave Holtzman and his team licensed to Eli Lilly, and now has become the monoclonal antibody solanezumab, which is possibly the most promising antibody against A-beta for the treatment of symptomatic and hopefully to help serve as a prevention for Alzheimer's disease. And speaking of prevention, Randy Bateman and the DIAN Trials Unit have launched the first ever anti-amyloid secondary prevention trial. So these are all really outstanding accomplishments, I think, that the ADRC should be deservedly proud. So our overall theme, our unifying theme, is the study of preclinical Alzheimer's disease, and of course that then means we are also studying biomarkers, in vivo biomarkers of Alzheimer's disease. We're trying to address two major questions. If someone has preclinical Alzheimer's disease, Alzheimer biomarker positive and yet cognitively normal person, will that person inevitably progress to symptomatic Alzheimer's disease? Is it going to happen in everyone? We don't know the answer to that. Secondly, can we identify people who are on that inevitable road? They are transitioning from cognitive normality to symptomatic Alzheimer's disease. Can we identify those and characterize those individuals? The answers to these questions will have enormous import, particularly for designing and implementing secondary trials of disease-modifying drugs in cognitively normal older adults who have biomarkers positive for Alzheimer's disease, which is the basis now of a trial that I'll discuss in just a bit, the A4 trial. And two recent grants that have been submitted, and I'll discuss their status in just a moment, each of them contain 3 science projects, and all of them in one way or other address this overall theme. So in our program project grant, Healthy Aging and Senile Dementia, Project 1 is can sensitive measures of cognition and or of functional connectivity detect the transition to symptomatic Alzheimer's disease. This project is being done in conjunction with Jason Hassenstab and Bo Ansis. Project 2 is determining whether abnormalities of sleep and CSF markers also can predict the transition to symptomatic Alzheimer's. This is led by Dave Holtzman, but also in conjunction with Brendan Lucy. And then Project 3 is looking at genetic influences that might influence this, transition and progression from cognitive normality to symptomatic Alzheimer's disease. Our just submitted ADRC renewal application contains 3 projects as well. And the one led by Ann Fagan and John McConaughey is also trying to identify, does tau, either measured by a new tau PET tracer or through the CSF, does that identify this transition zone? And then 2 other projects that are looking a little bit earlier in the progress of Alzheimer's disease in the preclinical stage, what might initiate or exacerbate that progress. So John Cerrito is going to be looking at factors that influence A-beta clearance, including competing proteins such as alpha-synuclein. And Eric Musiak is going to be looking at disrupted circadian rhythms and how that might aggravate or lead to A-beta dysregulation and subsequent neurodegeneration and oxidative damage. So all of these science projects are identifying this overall theme. However, the science projects in, excuse me for just a moment. I think I saw, okay, Bill Landau, thanks, coming in, and Ida, yes, right. You have a seat? Good, okay, great, okay, good. All of these are appropriate projects to target, but we want to be certain that we have adequate resources to support them. So in addition to characterizing preclinical Alzheimer's disease, we hearken back to our traditional clinical distinction of the earliest symptomatic stage of Alzheimer's disease in comparison with healthy aging. And we're looking at the pathobiological processes of Alzheimer's disease. But the ADRC itself, under the mechanism where it has to have cores and so forth, is insufficient to drive our project, particularly because the investigator-initiated research projects within the ADRC are low budget and are limited to 5 years. That is, once you've had an ADRC research project, you cannot renew it. So our program project grants are the major support for allowing us to investigate these research ideas. Many of you have seen this organizational chart before, listing our 4 large multi-component grants. I noticed that despite my dictum not to have an apostrophe S, we have one. This is on the upper right here is the Knight ADRC, including the 3 science projects I just mentioned, but the ADRC must be the outward face to all other entities with which it interacts, so it has many other functioning roles. The healthy aging and senile dementia, I talked about the science projects here. We expect it to be funded as of July 1. The adult children study has 5 projects, again looking at preclinical Alzheimer's disease antecedent to the expression of symptoms with imaging, biofluids, and cognitive changes, as well as now a new project led by Andrei Vlasenko looking at aerobic glycolysis. And then the DIAN study I'll mention particularly in regard to the TU in just a moment, but this is clearly the parent DIAN study is clearly an antecedent biomarker study. So here are all the cores that all 4 of these grants engender and are supported to various degrees by the grant mechanisms. But these 3 projects alone would not be able to drive our major research pursuit. We need these ongoing program projects to be able to really support it. So I'll give you an update on the grants that we do have. I mentioned healthy aging and senile dementia, originally funded in 1984. We're presently in a no-cost extension of year 30, but we expect that our application, which was submitted last September, will be funded as of July 1, 2014 for another 5 years. So we anticipate years 31 to 35 coming up. The Alzheimer's Disease Research Center grant, I'll say more about the specifics of this in just a moment, but it became funded in 1985, so next year will be our 30th anniversary of the ADRC, official ADRC. We're in year, because of a difference in how the NIA calculates the budget period, we're technically in year 31 of the ADRC grant. We just submitted a few weeks ago the renewal application, and it will be reviewed in the fall. By the way, I'm just going to return to this. I want to make the point that this is a remarkable accomplishment of all of us to have these 4 large grants, and I'll try to put it in perspective in a few slides more. But I do want you to know that as proud as I am being the principal investigator for each of these, I think in today's era that may not be a good idea. So I'll discuss what we plan to do with that. But you should all of us should take great pride in this accomplishment to be successful, to continually renew these very large grants, in this funding climate for sure, but just scientifically to have our ideas validated by our reviewers. So here are the 2 other multi-component grants. The Adult Children Study, one of our newest program project, funded originally in 2005. It was successfully renewed, and it's in the 4th year of its 2nd budget period. This is the grant that we're going to be working on beginning this summer in preparation for another renewal application to be submitted next May. So we've already begun planning for this grant and as of this month, and we think that we will be able to have a very successful application. But this is an area of potential weakness for us. We deliberately designed the adult children study and the healthy aging and senile dementia program projects to be really parent and child. We know in HASD what percentage of individuals 65 and older develop biomarker positivity, but we don't know when they develop it, so that's why we enrolled the adult children study cohort age 45 and up, so we can track through the lifetime when the biomarker changes become positive. So that's well and good, and it's tremendous that we're able, to the extent possible, to utilize the same protocol, the same instruments, the same assessment team, so that we have seamless collection of data and we can combine these two cohorts. But the danger I alluded to is because we combine them, we have very few publications that identify the adult children study itself. It's almost always in combination with other grants, and so we're going to have to make the case that the adult children study itself is worthy of continuation, and we've been talking about this. And then our international study, the Dominantly Inherited Alzheimer Network, it's in its last year of its first budget period, originally funded in 2008, and we anticipate it will be renewed for another 5 years, beginning also in July. So again, congratulations to all of us, really a tremendous accomplishment to have these 4 grants apparently all renewed and or funded. So the ADRC grant renewal, it was a large undertaking. Virginia Buckles and Krista Mulder were working, all of us were working very hard, but I give a lot of our success, and we all should give a lot of our success to Virginia and to Krista. Can't imagine trying to prepare a grant without their experience and their attention to detail and their insight and their impact. They're very, very knowledgeable about grant preparation and what people should propose, and they work with all of us to make our projects and cores successful. So they do a terrific job. Almost 1,000 pages. 8 cores, 3 projects, and then we have to put an overall section in that ties it all together. I think I've offered to the team, if you haven't read the overall, it's a worthwhile exercise, because it does put all of our initiatives into proper perspective. We're requesting total funds of about $14 million in this renewal application. Our current budget period, which we were awarded 5 years ago, we had about $10.5 million requested, and I guess awarded, so we've increased that. But I think the NIA's got a lot for its buck. So over 620 publications have been generated and supported by the ADRC. In one form or another, we've supported over 280 research studies that themselves represent $158 million in funded research. And if you look at all of the new awards and the research supported by the ADRC, it comes to something like almost $200 million that the ADRC has been leveraged to generate. So for a budget, 5-year budget period of $10.5 million, that's an 18-fold return on investment. So I think the NIA gets a lot of bang for the relatively meager bucks that it gives us. I tried to make that argument in the application. They should give us more. I can't list all of the ADRC studies that are ongoing here, so I just selected some. I hope haven't left out people whose, I don't mean to hurt anyone's feelings by not listing people, but this is really to give everyone a sense of the range of the studies that go on in the ADRC. So I put under imaging ADNI-TU, a multi-center national study, Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative, led by Bo Ansis. I didn't have room to put on a study that Bo Ansis and Dave Clifford have been doing, looking at neurocognitive change in older HIV-positive individuals, but that's another imaging study. Tammy Bensinger is, along with many colleagues in radiology and elsewhere, is looking at novel, more recent tracers for pathologic proteins in Alzheimer's disease, for beta-peer to identify amyloid deposits in the cerebral cortex, and now tau. Denise Head and her team has been looking at a variety of things, but including stress and brain structure. I mentioned Andrei Flasenko and Mark Rakel looking at brain metabolism, and new studies trying to think of new ways that we can register brain abnormalities, and this is led by Dmitry Yablonsky. Under blood and spinal fluid, Ann Fagan is our biomarker core leader, but we have a number of projects that utilize these biofluids. Randy Bateman, I mentioned, is looking at the production and clearance of a number of CNS proteins, and Ann Fagan is looking at biomarkers. Randy's trying to determine whether some of these proteins may be detectable in the blood. Mark Diamond and his associates are looking at tau aggregation. Under genetics, Allison Goad, Carlos Cuchaga, and others are looking at genetic variants in a number of diseases, most prominently Alzheimer's disease and frontotemporal dementia. Nupur Shal is leading a clinical study of familial frontotemporal dementia. Under cognition, we have, again, multiple investigators. Dave Belota has been looking at attentional control and abnormalities in attentional control as a biomarker in preclinical Alzheimer's disease. Mitch Summers looking at hearing and false hearing. David Kaufman from St. Louis University is looking at electroencephalographic correlates. And then 2 clinical trials are on the verge of being launched. Randy Bateman is WashU site PI for the A4 trial, and Dave Carr for the intranasal insulin trial. The A4 trial, I haven't read it, but I know there's a lot of publicity, including in today's Post-Dispatch, and it was a very popular topic at our participants meeting on Saturday. This is looking at cognitively normal older adults, 65 to 85, who agree to have a floor-beta-peer PET scan of the brain, and if it's positive, that is, if it detects cerebral cortical amyloid plaques deposits, then they're eligible to participate in a 3-year study of solanezumab to try to see if they can prevent a cognitive decline. And they're going to have to get an infusion of this solanezumab every month, every 4 weeks for a period of 3 years, but there's great interest in this. Now, there are 2 aspects of this. This is a secondary prevention trial in a in a cohort without a dominantly inherited risk factor, that is a pathogenic mutation for Alzheimer's disease. So this is in, quote, sporadic Alzheimer's disease. And 2, people are going to be told, you have an elevated tracer amount indicating amyloid in your brain. So people are going to be disclosed to the fact that they are biomarker positive. We have also many other studies going on, just a few here. I mentioned Brendan Lucy and Dave Holtzman's interest in sleep, but also Yoel Ju, David Beebe and his colleague Greg Van Stavern have been looking at a variety of aspects about the eye, the lens, the retina as an indicator of Alzheimer's disease. Kathy Rowe and colleagues, including Dave Carr, looking at driving and preclinical Alzheimer's disease, and Dave Holtzman and his laboratory interested in ApoE metabolism. The ADRC each year awards at least 3 pilot grants when we have appropriate applications and sufficient funds. We occasionally award additional grants from our discretionary funds. So far in this reporting period, we've had 23 pilot grants awarded, 21 from the actual grant and 2 from these discretionary funds. I was just very pleased to see the wide range of departments that the successful pilot applicants represent. So we're certainly attracting people who would not normally be interested in Alzheimer's disease. And the grants have been successful. I think 17 of the 23 have gone on to get new funding that totals $21 million. I've already mentioned the term transdisciplinary. I'll just underscore that again. So here at the medical school, our faculty come from 12 departments or divisions. So neurology, neurosurgery, psychiatry, pathology and immunology, geriatrics part of medicine, biostatistics, ophthalmology, occupational therapy, nursing, emergency medicine, cell biology and physiology, and developmental biology, but also for 4 schools on the Danforth campus, including law, social work, engineering, and arts and sciences. And within arts and sciences, of course, we've had a long-standing involvement, critical involvement from the Department of Psychology, but also more recently, chemistry and political science. I don't know that we emphasize this as much as perhaps we should, but we have really, we're not a drug development enterprise, but our research has led to the development of therapeutic strategies that as I've already mentioned with solanezumab, if it reaches appropriate potential, can be licensed to pharmaceutical companies who then can truly develop the drug. So solanezumab, I've already mentioned, developed by Dave Holtzman in his laboratory, but Dave now, along with Mark Diamond, are developing other antibodies, including one that targets tau, already been licensed and now being tested in phase 1 studies. Tim Miller is has developed antisense oligonucleotides to try to lower tau in brain, and there's a clinical trial with his approach that is ongoing. Dave, as I mentioned, has been interested in ApoE and has developed ApoE antibodies. And then Yvette Chalene, working with John Cerrito and others, has been taking a already approved drug, citalopram, and trying to determine whether it has a beneficial effect on A-beta and hence clinically in humans, and those trials are just starting. Speaking of trials, I'll turn to the DIAN Trials Unit, which I've mentioned already. It's led by Randy Bateman. It's a really remarkable team. It's been a real revelation to see it develop and form. And Randy's aided by many people. I will note that Anna Santa Cruz and Susan Mills, among many others, have been instrumental into the development of the DIAN-TU and its associated pharma consortium. I mentioned the trial has launched utilizing primarily DIAN participants in our overall international DIAN study, but other individuals who come from families, and if those individuals are not already enrolled in DIAN, they still may be eligible to enroll in DIAN-TU. So 10 sites are actively enrolling, or recruiting anyway, and we already have had 30 participants consent, and 23 of them have been randomized to study drug. So this is just very exciting, and more sites are planning to become active within the summer. Here's a slide provided by the TU team of the sites in the United States. Joy Snyder is the site PI for our Washington University site, which has by far the highest, what is it, 18 or 19 individuals of the 23 that have been randomized and dosed. But Canada, Italy, United Kingdom, Australia, France, we also hear from Japan, Argentina, and many other places. I don't have time to discuss in depth some of the recent scientific advances that have come from the Alzheimer's Disease Center, and I'll just list them, but I'm just again very impressed about the breadth and the depth of the science that goes on in the ADRC. And if you have a really remarkable study that I didn't list, please see me, please don't see me later. So there's always a danger in making a selection that you leave someone out that you shouldn't. So Carlos Cruchaga had a paper published this year in Nature talking about the PLD3 gene and its risk for Alzheimer's disease. I'll talk about that in just a moment. I mentioned the Diamond Lab has been interested in whether different tau aggregates can propagate, form a prion-like propagation through the brain. I mentioned the Chalene study on citalopram, whether it lowers A-beta production in healthy individuals, not humans, and then John Cerrito has demonstrated the same in transgenic mice. Tammy Benziger has taken our DIAN imaging and looked at cross-sectional as well as some longitudinal results and determined that the imaging biomarkers have regional variability. I mentioned Eric Music's interest in circadian clocks and and whether they contribute to neurodegeneration. Kathy Rowe, along with many others, has taken our biomarker data over many years and determined in cognitively normal people what the biomarkers foretell about indicating that these individuals will develop symptomatic Alzheimer's disease within an appropriate period of time. From Dave Holtzman's lab, mentioned again ApoE and how it serves as such a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. Certainly the ApoE4 isoform and how it influences or impairs A beta clearance. Working with Ann Fagan and many others, visiting scholar Stephanie Voss also took biomarker data and stratified the degree of biomarker positivity, or at least a number of biomarker domains, to determine the predictive value of changing a cognitively normal individual into someone with symptomatic Alzheimer's disease. Then Jan Duchek and Bo Ansis and Dave Belota have been looking at performance on a measure of attentional control and resting state connectivity. So really, again, just a wide range and very impressive. So we can't do our research if we don't have committed, dedicated participants, and we're fortunate that we do. That is a great tribute to our Memory and Aging Project staff. We talk about our grants, grant support, ADRC, HASD, and so forth. Our participants only know where they come for their clinical assessments, and that's called the Memory and Aging Project. So the Memory and Aging Project is the clinical research office that serves all of these grants, because no matter what grant mechanism a participant is enrolled in, they will come to the Memory and Aging Project for their evaluation. And this is where we recruit individuals to participate in your studies. So again, without our participants, we cannot succeed, and we're fortunate that we have just a wonderful group of individuals, highly committed. I mean, it's just amazing to think that they're participating in longitudinal biomarker studies, and we have a retention rate of something approaching 90%. So it's really, really great. And that comes back to our Memory and Aging Project staff. It's the best clinical core staff in the history of Alzheimer's disease research centers. So this year we had 385 participants attend our annual participants meeting, including 65 African Americans. In IDA, that turns out to be 17%. I almost had them stand up for you, but I didn't. Really very, very impressive showing. The agenda is shown here. We had updates from a new member of our ADRC team and the Memory and Aging Project Satellite, Dr. Danielle Cobbs. Jennifer Phillips talked about a new program that we introduce individuals with symptomatic Alzheimer's disease to first and second year medical students. Then we talked about, Dave Holtzman talked about sleep and how it may relate to Alzheimer pathogenesis. Another neuroimager, Manu Goal, who's working with Tammy Benziger, gave us updates on the imaging of Alzheimer's disease. Randy talked about the clinical trials, including A4, and the study of nasal insulin to fight forgetfulness. SNF study, intranasal insulin. And then the disclosure study that I'll talk about in just a moment. So this is the setup at the DoubleTree Westport Hotel. People come in and have a breakfast. Sometimes I think they probably come more for the breakfast than the program, but they like heart-healthy foods such as sausage and bacon, and that really is an attraction. And it's a great turnout from our staff, and many of our core leaders and our faculty come and tell the participants, genuinely tell them how much we appreciate what they do for us. There are some of the people who are speaking. Here's Danielle Cobbs, Dave Holtzman. This is a medical student, Jordan Stanley, who was a member of that Dementia Understanding Program for first-year medical students, and this is his person who was his mentor, a person with mild symptomatic Alzheimer's disease, and his wife, and they talked about the importance of the study for all three of them. We have terrific partners. The ADRC has forged terrific partnerships with a number of organizations in St. Louis. Our St. Louis chapter of the Alzheimer's Association goes back, really predates the founding of the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. I mentioned our African American Advisory Board. Through the advisory board, we've also recently developed very strong ties with a remarkable organization of remarkable women, Links Incorporated, the St. Louis chapter. We have an internal ethics committee in the ADRC that ponders such things, such as what are the ethical issues involved in returning individual research results to our participants. Harvey A. Friedman Center for Aging, the Hope Center for Neurologic Disorders, and we really do get very strong support from our university, from the medical school and from the university as a whole. Our alumni and development friends have been very effective. I mentioned David Blasingame and David Shear and Pam Morris, but also Pamela Buell, and many, many generous donors, including Charles F. and Joanne Knight, who endowed our center in 2010. So our African American Advisory Board, I've told the story. We don't want to study in our Memory and Aging Project cohort of research volunteers only people who are of one ethnicity, because then we'll learn about Alzheimer's disease in only one ethnicity. So we want to represent the St. Louis population, and by far the largest group other than Caucasians in St. Louis are African Americans. About 15 years ago, the percentage of African Americans in our cohort, our research cohort, was about 3 to 4%. We formed the African American Advisory Board to help us become more welcoming to African Americans and to be able to explain our research mission to them. There are lots of things I had to learn, and I've been guided by Norman and Bernice Thompson, who succeeded him, and now the current chair of the African American Advisory Board, Ida Goodwin-Wolfach. And Ida is here, Norman is here, many others are here as well, including Karen Collins. But you can see that this has been essential to us. We've had cultural competency trainings. We need to do this on a regular basis, but it was eye-opening how we were not promoting diversity and how we've tried to learn lessons, and I think with some success, building our percentage of African Americans in longitudinal biomarker studies from 3 to 4% now to about 15%. And just as an example, some of the work that we do, I think, is justified. So we want to study African Americans as well as whites, and there's some evidence that the Alzheimer's disease, the prevalence of Alzheimer's disease is more frequent in African Americans than it is in whites. So why is that? Is it different diet or lifestyle factors? Is it different illnesses such as hypertension? Or is it genes? And the study that was published a little over a year ago talking about the ABCA7 gene found that African Americans with a variant in that gene are twice as likely to develop symptomatic Alzheimer's disease than African Americans who lack that gene variant. And that variant doesn't exist for whites, or the effect of that variant doesn't exist for whites, so it's much, much lower. So it suggests that there are genetic factors that may vary as a result of race or ethnicity. In that sample from that report about ABCA7, over 100 blood samples from our African Americans in our cohort, contributed by Allison Goat, helped this study. And I've already mentioned that Carlos Cruchaga has been looking at gene variants in PDL3, and it turns out there's a greater risk for Alzheimer's disease of those variants in African Americans, twice that than it is for whites. So it certainly is important that African Americans are represented in research so that we can learn about these differences in risk factors. When Norman decided to step down as the chair of the African American Advisory Board, we inaugurated the Norman R. Seay Lecture, And we hold it every fall, generally in October, and I'm pleased to announce that the 9th Seay lecture will be this October 7th. And we just learned today that Dr. Goldie Bird, who is the Dean for the College of Arts and Sciences at North Carolina A&T State University, has accepted our invitation, so she will be here on October 7th. She has a distinguished research career in looking at genetics of Alzheimer's disease in African Americans, so it will be, you'll hear more about this, but it's sure to be a very, very important and interesting presentation. So again, with some trepidation, because I'm sure I'm going to be overlooking substantial recognitions that people have had, and I failed to list here, but I just want to note that our ADRC faculty is highly represented when it comes time for awards and honors. So Randy Bateman and Dave Holtzman received the Chancellor Wrighton's Award for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. Dave Carr was named a Distinguished Clinician Award here at the School of Medicine. Anu Pergo Shaw received the Outstanding Young Alumni Award from her alma mater, Iowa State University. Ida Goodwin Wolfuck, who is our current chair of the African American Advisory Board, was recognized by the Monsanto Family YMCA with a Lifetime Achievement Award. Dave Holtzman was honored by the St. Louis Academy of Science with its Fellows Award. For some reason, last year, the School of Medicine ran out of eligible candidates for the Second Century Award, so they picked me. Eric Music was given the Eileen and Meyer Coppolo Award, and Jennifer Phillips and Murtis Spencer were recognized with the Doris May and Harvey A. Friedman Award. And Mark Rakel just recently was awarded the very prestigious Kavli Award in Neuroscience. So I think I talked just very briefly about this idea of disclosure of individual research results. I mentioned it a couple times already. I think it is going to be driven by the desire of participants to know their results, and the A4 trial, in which they must agree to learn their results, will be a very interesting exercise in how this should be done. But our participants are, many of them are demanding now that we change our current policy, which is embedded in our informed consent, which of course they all sign, that we do not disclose their individual results. So when a participant comes to the Memory and Aging Project, if the participant wishes, we will give their their primary physician an overall sense of whether they're cognitively normal or whether they may have dementia, and if so, what should be done about it. But we're not involved in giving management advice. We don't prescribe medications. We don't make a formal diagnosis. We always refer them to their primary physician, and we don't give the primary physician the cognitive test scores that we obtain or any other research results. We don't do that. There are reasons for that, but that's been our policy for a long time. But we've been hearing from participants, why not? Why can't I have a result? So we decided to do a survey of our participants to learn their wishes, and this was markedly helped, directed, and in collaboration with Matt Gobble from the Department of Political Science. So in the past year, we surveyed about 220 cognitively normal participants. It was a survey in 3 parts. The first part was to ask them flat out, would you like to learn your research results? Then we divided the group more or less evenly. One group, after we learned what their initial attitudes were toward learning their results, got an educational piece about possible risks of learning their research results. And then we had them retake the survey to see if the learning their risks, if that changed their attitudes. The other group, the placebo group, just didn't learn about the risks of learning their results. They learned about information about Alzheimer's disease. So what are the potential risks of learning one's results? Well, I think the most important one at present is really it's not so much that they want to know what their SUVR is for beta peer in the brain. They want to know if they have a certain SUVR, does that mean they're not going to get Alzheimer's or they are going to get Alzheimer's? They want to know what the predictive value of the test is. And we don't know that. We can't tell them what the predictive value is. And nor can we say if it puts them at increased risk when they might become symptomatic. There's a remote risk in some cases, particularly if they find out that they're biomarker positive, as they will for the A4 study, and that gets into the medical records that may jeopardize their opportunity to get certain forms of insurance, particularly long-term care. So there are some potential risks. But first thing, so we asked them, first survey, what would you like to have your research results told you? Overwhelming, yes. I am interested in learning my research results. Do you have a right to it? Overwhelming, yeah. I have a right to learn that. And some people are, we have, again, very committed, dedicated participants, but some feel very strongly about that. So then what happens after we give them the intervention, the education about the risks? Here's their pre-intervention. So post-intervention, the placebo group didn't change at all. 94% still wants to know their risks. The post-intervention, the people who did learn about the potential risks, well, still almost 80% want to know, but there was a significant decrease in the number want to know. And it turns out there are some factors that Matt Gobble and John Gublar and others are examining that might influence how people responded. For one, it partly depended on whether a person thought they were going to get Alzheimer's, symptomatic Alzheimer's disease. So my dad got it at 75. I know I'm going to get it. We hear that all the time. If they think they're going to get it, then the intervention about research risk didn't have an effect. Interestingly, the number of participants meetings that people attended also had an effect. If they've attended more than one, in which we've been talking about this, then they're much less likely after the intervention to want to know. And there are several other factors. I've already mentioned having a demented parent, educational attainment, and interestingly, what type of research results? You know what most people really want to know is how they perform on those cognitive tests. That's what they'd like to know. Particularly, they want to know how they did compared to last year. So what are we going to do? Well, we've opened up a can of worms. We think that we should continue the survey, but now maybe not predispose people to saying, I want to know my results. We know that they want to know the results, so now we'll just have them come and they'll be randomized either to the placebo or the educational piece about learning their risks and see if that alters the degree to which people say they do want to know. But we need to start talking with our IRB and others about the ethics of returning results to them, to our participants, and what the effect will be on our ADRC research. If someone is signed up to participate in the adult children study because they had an affected parent, and that means that they think they're at greater risk for developing Alzheimer's, and why they're willing to every 3 years or every 2 years undergo all the imaging and the lumbar puncture for cerebral spinal fluid collection and the cognitive test every year. If they find out they're biomarker negative, they may say, hey, I escaped. I don't need to be in the study anymore. Or maybe it will affect their test performance. This is something you have to consider on cognitive tests in particular. Say you're told you're biomarker positive. Then people will be, could be more likely to be concerned when they forget their cell phone when they go to work. And they may think that's the start of it, and they start to get depressed and worried, and that might change their test performance. But I do think we're going to have to consider and eventually change our policy. We're going to have to do this very delicately for sure. So Krista Mulder wanted to look, I've already told you how proud I am of our 4 big grants, and it absolutely has to put us at the top of the heap in terms of the amount of funding that we get for the NIA compared to all of our fellow Alzheimer's disease centers. There are 27 of them funded by the National Institute on Aging. And in 2009, we were at the very top. We had more funding than any other center. This year, we're still pretty high, number 2, but Arizona is higher. That's the Banner Health System, Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. And they recently have had mega grants awarded to them for their studies of clinical trials in asymptomatic people, including a trial that they want to launch in ApoE4 homozygotes. So they now outrank us. Well, if you'll give me just a moment, I want to show you my alma mater. I went to the University of Rochester in New York. This is the campus. It's on the Genesee River. This is downtown Rochester, and up here is Lake Ontario. Beneath those clouds is Toronto, Canada. And my 40th reunion is coming up. I've not been to a medical school reunion, so this will be interesting. And it turns out, even though I haven't been to a reunion, I'm the class agent, so I have to call people up and see if they're going to come. And it struck me that, so I'm 66, and most of my classmates same age, that about half of the people I called are retired or retiring. So I thought about that. Well, that's interesting. And what should I do? I haven't really thought about retirement. I decided I'm not going to retire, certainly now. I'm not planning a definite date for my retirement at all. But it just got me thinking. And it also got me thinking about the leadership of all of our programs in the ADRC. So maybe it's time that I shouldn't be the PI of all 4 grants. And what's the advantage of me transitioning some or all of the grants? Well, we have terrific leaders here. I mean, many people in this room could lead these grants. And we have great talent, and we ought to nurture and reward it and benefit from it. I also mentioned that if I transition some of the grants or all of the grants, that I think it might reduce some perceived liability. We've had a comment from the NIA that already there's I have too many grant dollars controlled by a single investigator. Remember, the NIH in general and the NIA in particular is strapped for funds, so why should one investigator control so much money? And one grant review was concerned that I might be overcommitted. So those would be reasons to transition. Cons, I've been around a long time. That gives me institutional knowledge, which I think is important, helps keep us focused on our mission. I think I bring clinical expertise to our entity, and because of multiple things, including the fact I've been around a long time and I've developed that CDR training program that people all over the world have had to listen to, I think I bring global recognition. So there's pluses and minuses. So as I've been debating about this, I thought maybe I might be inspired by some force or some person who could really help bring clarity to the situation. So I thought I would turn to the most interesting person in the world, the most interesting man in the world. And this is the Dos Equis beer person who does amazing things. And it worked. It worked. I was inspired. And I see a way forward. So for the DIAN, next year, Randy Bateman will become the principal investigator. So congratulate Randy. And I think in the next funding period for the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, to be determined when, we have a candidate. I'm certain that this will be a wonderful candidate, but to be determined. I think I'd like to turn the ADRC leadership over to another person as well. But I will maintain the principal investigator status for the 2 program projects that I say are driving our research into the preclinical stage of Alzheimer's disease. And also, at present, I will remain the director of the Memory and Aging Project. That is, I'll still be the clinical core leader for each of those 4 grants. So I'm going to be around for a while. You won't, I'm going to, not planning to retire and don't want to retire, at least at present, and still think as long as we are successful in getting these grants renewed and we can all benefit from each other, that we will have a great leadership team. As a matter of fact, I think this leadership group will be unequaled and commensurate with all of you. So thanks.